Hey everyone. Okay, let's talk about reason number two, or one of many reasons why kids can struggle with reading. And especially if it's subtle, then these are issues that will cause kids to appear to be just weak readers, or will have you just spinning your wheels wondering, why is my kid having such a hard time, when in fact there's other issues going on and so forth. So I'm going to get into that in terms of addressing it, understanding it, and identifying it and so forth. So this gets missed a lot. I find that there's more and more awareness of dyslexia in terms of poor phonemic awareness, in terms of poor auditory processing, and so forth. And we do tend to recognize when a kid has serious issues with visual processing, like letter reversals, but when it's more subtle, it's much more likely to get missed. And this is what's really going to cause breakdown with reading comprehension. So it's all about right action at the right time. And if you're wondering what I mean by that, and you haven't been following me for a while, I'm going to explain that a little bit more with just talking about a client that I was working with. So the first thing I want to start off with saying is that when a child learns to read, where I am, it's around kindergarten that kids actually start developing, reading skills and so forth. No one ever tells them that words shouldn't move around on the page. And I heard this recently, a training that I did this fall with a woman who specializes in Irlen syndrome, and said, no one ever tells, kids, when you're reading, the words shouldn't be moving, the words shouldn't be blurry, the words shouldn't be skipping. And so we sometimes are shocked whenever we have a visual processing assessment or even Irlen syndrome assessment or screening, and we find out that a child has visual processing issues because it was never obvious or severe. And parents will say, well, why didn't you tell me that, the words were doing this? And the kid doesn't know because that's their normal. They don't know anything else, so to speak. So very important that you make kids aware of that, but keep in mind that all that they know is their present experience. And the other thing to keep in mind is, I find particularly when biochemical factors are at play, like nutrition, deficiencies and food allergies that can cause brain inflammation, depending what the situation is, these are the kids where one day things will be better and other days things are not so good. So what I mean by that is, I'm thinking of a family member I know who had dyslexia, and he said, he had dyslexia and visual processing disorder, and he would say some days it would be fine, I could read okay, and then other days, like, the words moved or there was more letter reversals or whatever the case may be. And when I hear this really makes me think that something is going on with biochemistry, in terms of, well, did they eat something recently that triggered some brain inflammation? Is there some kind of biochemical imbalance? Are they nutrient deficient? There's a lot of factors that can contribute to that as well, which I've talked about previously, so I'm not going to get into that too much, but I just wanted to touch on that because it is really critical to understand that point. So this is where, if your child has these reading difficulties, whether they're subtle or reading comprehension difficulties, you can just be like really frustrated if you feel like you're trying everything and you're not getting the results that you hoped for. So this one client, we'll call him Cole, poor reader, had, writing difficulties, dysgraphia and so forth, and also had a lot of headaches for a kid who was like, I think when he was first, I think it was like 9 years old around then. And the decision, or, what the doctor determined, was that these headaches were from the stress of the reading and writing difficulties, because he was just dealing with so much and so forth, and he was being bullied, which, a lot of us would think that, right? We get headaches when we're stressed. But this kid, by the time he came to see me, was 13. Nothing had improved after, years of reading interventions, tutoring, all this type of stuff. It was just felt like a grueling uphill battle, if you can even say uphill. And mom was really concerned because he really was starting to shut down. He hated school. And for a long time, he was the kid who was just determined to try. And he was just really starting to shut down because he was starting to think that, nothing could be done, so to speak. Let me know in the comments below if this sounds like your kid, if this is something you can relate to, whether it's the reading frustration or, you know, someone just telling your child's a weak reader, or, you know, a child that's struggling with low self-esteem, or even just shutting down. So finally, mom was telling someone at work about her son, and they said, why don't you have him assessed for visual processing disorder? And they did, and lo and behold, Cole had visual processing disorder. Now, the unfortunate thing is that there's a lot of steps you need to take in order to correct visual processing disorder, and Cole's mom spent a ton of money on vision therapy, and they didn't get the results they hoped for. And vision therapy is great, it's fantastic, and I want to be really clear on that. I'm not knocking it, but you need to do right action at the right time. So when they came to see me, I screened Cole, and he had retained primitive reflexes. He had an hemispheric imbalance. His cerebellum was weak. He had all kinds of, let's say, weak connections or underdeveloped areas of his brain that needs to be addressed first before you do vision therapy. So in terms of how we're going to build a better brain, you have to start with the lower brain levels. You have to get those reflexes that are retained. You need to get them integrated. You have to stimulate the weaker brain hemisphere, build the cerebellum, do the visual motor exercises, and then get into vision therapy. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see, and I get it, like frustrations with parents who've dumped a ton of money on vision therapy, because if it's done at the right time, it can be super, super effective. So basically the key is, with visual processing disorder, you need to develop those lower brain levels. And also it comes down to making sure when we do that correct sequence, that we do it right action at the right time. So when I say we need to integrate primitive reflexes first, I mean it. We need to do that first. We can't start stimulating the weak hemisphere and then do primitive reflex integration. We need to develop the brain in the order that it would naturally develop. So it's like, we don't start putting a roof on a house when the foundation isn't finished. We need to start from the bottom and work our way up. It's called bottom-up development. So, you know, then the visual motor exercises, then the hemispheric integration, then the cerebellum stimulation, and then the vision therapy. So if you're wondering, does my child have visual processing issues? I'm going to run through a little list. Let me know in the comments below, whether you're watching the live or the replay, if you think this applies to your child. And I should mention, it could apply or be if they have visual processing issues or Irlen syndrome. So it could be either of those. You know, some are very specific to Irlen syndrome, but both of those need to be investigated, and it could be both, and it could be more. Like, I've worked with kids who have Irlen syndrome, visual processing disorder, and you know, dyslexia, in terms of like poor phonemic awareness and auditory processing. So if your child has things like poor hand-eye coordination, poor handwriting, just obviously reading struggles, right? Reverses letters or numbers. If they have poor spelling, poor spacing when printing. So whether it's printing, like for sure spacing, obviously when we're printing, but even if they have learned to do cursive, if it's, you know, just it's not looking like it should for their age. If they skip words when they're reading, trouble copying notes from the board, if they have poor focus, and then more specific to Irlen syndrome is if they have headaches, if they are sensitive to light. And I could go on about Irlen syndrome. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that today because that's a whole other category. But let me know in the comments below, does your child have these? And, you know, like I said, the first thing you need to do whenever your child has visual processing issues is you need to first identify it. And I want to be clear that it's a spectrum like anything. So your child could be really mild. And I find these are the kids that get labeled as weak readers, and they're the kids that are told, you know, they just need to pay attention better when they're reading, and the reading comprehension be much better. or we need to make sure this child uses a graphic organizer because then they're going to, better retain what they read. And definitely memory can be a factor with poor reading comprehension, but sometimes it's visual processing issues that are causing them to work so hard to read and get everything focused and, lined up and so forth. Whether it's subtle or severe, and this can cause the reading breakdown. And this, obviously, if they're focusing so hard on just getting, on the decoding aspect, this is where they're going to have a really hard time retaining. So let me know in the comments below, does this sound familiar? Do you suspect your child has this? Maybe you have an official diagnosis. Have you tried vision therapy? And, either you had great results or maybe you were frustrated with the results. So let me know. And I will post a link in the comments to my free starter kit with some basic exercises and to get your child focused and calm and so forth, so that they can learn better. And if you would like to book a clarity call, do so if you're interested in knowing more about my program, The Full Potential Formula, to help build your child's brain from the bottom up. So, and Amy, I see you popping on saying, who's diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia now he has. Yeah, so Amy, I'm so glad you said that, because I see so often kids who are diagnosed with dyslexia and they maybe don't have an official diagnosis of dysgraphia, but it's pretty obvious. Or they have dysgraphia and there's not this identification, if you will, or, nailing it down as the cause of the dysgraphia, right? Dysgraphia is not the end of the answer. And the dysgraphia can be related to visual processing issues as well as motor issues as well, like with the cerebellum and other parts of the brain and so forth. And I'm actually going to be talking more about the overlap in dysgraphia this week and into next week. So stay tuned. So thanks for sharing. Okay, so thanks for joining, everyone, and share in the comments below whether you're watching, whether you've watched live or the replay. And until next time, have a